And now, a Scared for Reals Extra.
Hey, it's Chris O'Neill.
Adam Perry.
Putting the spotlight on what I would consider one of the top 250 films of all time. It's essential cinema, The Seventh Seal, directed by Ingmar Bergman. One of two films that would come out in the year 1957. This one came out in February of 57. Adam, I know you haven't seen this one, but consider this maybe an educational experience for you.
Okay.
Very condescending way I just said it. No, but this is one of the films when someone is asked, if I'm going to watch a foreign film, which one should I watch first? I would go with either a Kurosawa or this well-known Ingmar Bergman film. I showed you the famous image of the knight playing chess with death. You've seen that.
Yep.
Everywhere. It didn't start here. He actually saw a painting and it inspired him. He actually wrote the play for this. It was called, which in Swedish translated to wood painting. It was in 1953, 1954. Because one thing about Ingmar Bergman is he made so many amazing cinema experiences. He was a stage director at heart, and he wrote it for students of the Malmo City Theater. Now, its first public performance, which he did direct, was on radio 70 years ago in 1954, and then he directed it on stage the next spring, and it was staged in Stockholm, directed by someone else. In his autobiography, Bergman wrote that wood painting gradually became the Seventh Seal, an uneven film, which lies close to my heart, he says, because it was made under difficult circumstances in a surge of vitality and delight, he says. Now, the script for The Seventh Seal was commenced while Bergman was in hospital recovering from a stomach complaint. I guess it was first rejected. Now, the head of the film industry in Sweden, Bergman was given the go-ahead of the project only after The Smiles of a Summer Night. That's a thing. He started his career with this, and he would later reveal that he wished he still had like other people eyeing his work as closely as the Swedish film industry did. Because Smiles of a Summer Night got a release at the Cannes Film Festival in 1955, this guy can make us some money.
Yeah, right. Imagine that.
Well, the interesting thing about Ingmar Bergman, he's always painted as a depressing, his movies are depressing. Yes, he made some really ultra depressing movies. There's no doubt about it. You watch his trilogy, Winter Light, The Silence, those movies are very dark. They're very depressing. Very, very dark and depressing.
Well, I mean,
but again, Smiles of a Summer Night was a romantic comedy.
Yeah.
It was a romantic comedy that followed like 4 different couples throughout the movie.
Right.
That's my wife's favorite film of his. It's one of her favorite movies, period, because she's like, these movies are all depressing, but hey, he actually did some funny stuff.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing about The Seventh Seal, it has a lot to do with death, okay? Ingmar himself said this film actually overcame his crippling fear of death because the film so overtly dealt with the subject, he found it a highly, quote-unquote, cathartic experience. But even though it's a subject matter about death, the plague, because that's thing that haunts everyone in the movie. Death is following all of these people throughout the whole movie. There's a lot of humor in it. They're like, am I really laughing at this? It's a lot of a very dark comedy. A guy trying to climb up the tree, trying to escape death, and death is down there sawing it down, sawing the tree down. It's like, really?
Yeah.
Really? But yeah, the interesting thing about it, remember how I said if someone came up to me, I want to watch foreign films. Remember how I said I'm either going to recommend Kurosawa or this film? Mm-hmm. He said his inspiration was the period films of Kurosawa.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. He was a big fan, and I mean, the film is just so brilliantly shot. I could go on and on about the shots, but anyone who's done any world cinema research, this film is always at the top of everyone's list. You basically, Max von Sydow in his first starring role, the guy was like 27 years old at the time. He is a disillusioned knight. He has a cynical squire. They return from the Crusades to find the country ravaged by the plague. The knight encounters death, whom he challenges to a chess match, believing he can survive as long as the game continues. That's one of the interesting things about the movie. The death keeps like, why are you stalling? That's my business. He's always trying to just stretch time out because it's the plague. People are dying left and right, and death has his eyes on him.
Yeah.
So he's going to try to not outwit death, because you can't do that, but he's going to try to keep alive as long as he can.
Right.
So that's the whole premise of the movie. And then you come across these caravan of actors. You got this guy and his wife, their infant son, actor manager. Now the thing is, now the actor, the male actor of the bunch, he has a vision of his wife leading the infant Jesus, which he relates to, the smiling, disbelieving wife of his. So he's constantly having visions of all this stuff. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Antonius Block, the disillusioned knight, brilliantly portrayed by Max von Sydow. As soon as he shows up, boom, you see the presence right there. He always had it. So him and his squire visit a church. There's a fresco being painted. There's a lot of jokes from there. And then there's a deserted village. Finally, Antonius Block and his squire meet up with the acting troupe, and, all sorts of chaos. And there's a lot of religious philosophy thrown around in this movie. It's just a very straightforward plot. Again, you've seen it 1,000 times, and we've talked about it. It's all the way it's presented.
Right.
And the way Bergman always presented his material, whether it be slightly sarcastic, very depressing, or all-out comical, he always presented it in a fresh way. Because most of his stuff you could definitely see being played out on a stage rather than a movie, but he transcends the stage and makes it an amazing, unforgettable cinematic experience. But yeah, they meet all sorts of condemned women, and Antonius Block, he's trying to get home to his house, and he wants to see his wife before death takes him. So he's biding his time. Biding his time with death. So they go on a bunch of misadventures, leading to probably one of the most unforgettable finale sequences of all time. And they're doing the dance of death together. I'm sure, Adam, you've probably seen that image floating around before.
Sure.
And that was like all improvised, apparently. That whole dance was improvised at the end.
Wow.
It was like they had a moment where the shot worked, and they just did something, and that's what came out of it. And the interesting thing is that main actor who has these visions sees them dancing with death. His wife doesn't have that gift, and he can see it, and he's smiling, and that's how the movie ends. Yes, it's dealing with dark subject matter. The way it's presented, there are scenes where feces on this one person who's being crucified, and there's religious zealot thing. There's critique of the Crusades and all that kind of stuff. Right. So there's a lot of serious subject matter in this film, but again, the way it's presented is just brilliant. The portrait of the Middle Ages. Now, medieval Sweden, as portrayed in this movie, I don't know a lot about Swedish Middle Ages stuff. Do you, Adam?
No.
Different stuff, like there's a flagellant movement that was foreign to Sweden, a large-scale witch persecutions that began in the 15th century. Well, that happened a few centuries later in the United States with the witch trials.
Right. Yeah. It carried over.
Big time.
Not to get off topic, a fun fact about the American witch trials compared, or at least in Salem, compared to the Swedish and the Scottish witch trials. Witches in the United States were never burned at the stake. They were
Yeah.
Fun fact.
Hot fact.
Yeah.
So I guess with regard to the relevancy of historical accuracy to a film that is heavily metaphorical and stuff like that, the writing, A Night at the Movies, there was this critique of it. The film only partially succeeds in conveying the period atmosphere and thought world of the 14th century. Bergman would probably counter that it was never his intention to make historical or period film. Duh!
Wow.
I just, when people try to show off their smarts and critique, and they use it to make money off of someone else's work,
right.
A lot of critics do that, unfortunately, or a lot of them used to do that more, just to show off how smart they are about, this movie's not historically accurate.
Right.
That happened with Scorsese with Gangs of New York. This movie is not accurate. I wasn't trying to make an accurate movie.
Right.
It's an idea. Mm-hmm. It's an operatic sense. It's cinema.
Yeah.
And that's what Bergman, he wasn't looking to make a biopic,
Right. And unfortunately, like you just said, that happens so often in movies and stuff like that. We also understand when these filmmakers are making a movie, they're trying to entertain you.
Right.
And they're going to take liberties to keep you interested in their film. Like most perfect example of that is Apollo 13, when Tom Hanks and Bill Paxton
Oh, okay.
and Kevin Bacon argue in the capsule about who stirred the tanks.
Mm-hmm.
The real life Jim Lovell will be the first to tell you that never happened.
It's just for dramatic effect.
Life was too important at that time to bitch at each other.
Right.
So it just didn't happen. But for theater, cinema, for movies' sake, to build tension, Ron Howard puts in this argument that kind of just, builds the boiling point in the capsule to make you feel the importance of what's going on to these three guys in space in this tiny tin can called a space capsule.
Right.
But in real life, Jim Lovell says, there was no argument. It was 100% focus,
Right.
try to survive.
Well, the difference, Apollo 13 is based on a true story. This here, the Seventh Seal, isn't even based on a true story.
Right.
It just takes place during the 14th, 15th century with the plague and everything like that. It wasn't meant to be anything but, it was like Ben-Hur. Ben-Hur is
Right.
actually a better example.
Right.
Because Ben-Hur happens during the time of Christ.
Yeah.
It's not a true story.
Mm-hmm.
Christ
Exactly.
was real.
Right.
But Ben-Hur was a fictional character.
Yeah.
But it takes place during the time of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And just like this movie takes place during the time of the plague, Middle Age Sweden. So
Right.
it's not meant to be an accurate portrayal. And I don't know why to pick apart that movie, to write a book about it, and just to sell some
People
books.
just to complain.
Right.
But
the major theme of the movie, speaking of the Bible here, the title is actually, if you read the Bible, it's a passage from the book of Revelation. It's used both at the very start of the film and then towards the end, beginning with the words, "And when the Lamb had opened the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven about the space of a half an hour." That's Revelation 8:1 right there. They literally quoted the Bible in that movie. And that was an interesting theme. Death was always something. It wasn't just this movie. It was always death, the end of life, something that always fascinated Bergman, and it scared him, and he delved it out in so many movies. Because also in 1957, Wild Strawberries came out. Mm-hmm. And you want to talk about like two masterpieces in one year. It's like Wild Strawberries. What is the better movie, Wild Strawberries or Seventh Seal? I don't know, flip a coin. But that came out literally the same year. Max von Sydow had a tiny part in that film. But, it's about this grouchy old egotistical professor. A guy, by the way, the guy who played the professor directed The Phantom Carriage, which I talked about in our holiday episode, about death on New Year's Eve and all that kind of stuff. But he's getting this honorary award. He's a 78-year-old guy, and the whole movie is reflecting on his youth and some of his regrets. And there's like this opening sequence right near the beginning of the film where he has a nightmare, and it's probably one of the best nightmare shots in a film ever, because he's confronted by all these people with no faces, and it's like,
oh wow,
yeah,
creepy.
Well, yeah, in the coffin, it falls out, and he sees his own body in there, and it's like whew.
Yeah,
A lot of creaky, frightening sounds. Again, this came out, I mean, to be able to have the oomph, and he had stomach problems while he was filming this, it's like he did two masterpieces back to back. But yeah, I highly recommend both of the films, and again, Wild Strawberries they're both kind of road movies in a way, because they're both on a destination. Antonius Block and his squire are on his way back to his house. Mm-hmm. And of course, they meet interesting characters along the way. The squire meets a woman that he saves from an abusive situation. And then they meet the troupe of actors. Wild Strawberries, he's got his son's wife with him the whole time, kind of driving him to the the place where he's going to get his honorary award and everything. And they meet up with some young people, and one of them reminds of his young love and everything like that. So they're both like road movies in a sense. But again, your typical road movie is not your typical road movie with Ingmar Bergman. Mm-hmm. So they're both, it's actually would be interesting to sit down and watch both of these movies as like a double feature, because literally February, Seventh Seal came out in 1957, and then December 1957, Wild Strawberries came out. Talk about like beginning and ending your year with a bang.
Yeah.
That will do it. But Seventh Seal, for some reason, just sticks out in society more. I mean, there was just the reception upon this movie was so major. It was on a lot of people's top 10 lists and everything like that. Now, the Seventh Seal significantly helped Bergman, not only as a Swedish filmmaker, like at that time, he was swiftly becoming the greatest Swedish filmmaker of all time, but he was also getting a lot of recognition worldwide for his movies too. I mean, it won a special jury prize at the Cannes Film Festival. And Max von Sydow, B.B. Anderson, they became well known to the European film community. Seventh Seal had this symbolism that was people just who were trained in literary culture were just beginning to discover all of the art of film. And it rated so high on the art scale. Mm-hmm. Again, I don't think he was, all movies are art, but I think he was just trying to deal with his own personal demons, and it just came out the way it did, and it's one of those movies that stuck. You want to talk about the cultural impact of this movie. I know one movie you can think of off the top of your head that I know you've seen, Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey.
Oh, yeah.
William Sandler playing Death.
Yep.
It's exactly the same look, vibe as the Seventh Seal.
Very cool. Choose your game.
Don't they play like a game in that movie?
They play a lot of games.
Yes, but it was all inspired by this film.
Oh, that's cool.
Representation of death as a white-faced man who wears a dark cape, plays chess. It's been parodied so many times. There's even some of that in Wild Strawberries. The protagonist plays badminton against death and stuff like that. But popular music, Iron Maiden's album Dance of Death. Remember that one? I don't know if you
Yep.
The title track was inspired by the final scene of this movie. According to the guitarist, Janik, he said, "These figures on the horizon start doing a little jig, which is the Dance of Death." So there you have it. Mm-hmm. Opera, there's some operatic pieces in 2016, for instance. It wasn't the first time, though, in a movie where, playing games with death, because just the decade before, there was this British romantic comedy called A Matter of Life and Death, which, as you know, watching the Hammer films, the British title is always different than the American title.
Right.
A Matter of Life and Death was a little too much for the U.S. audiences, so they changed it to A Stairway to Heaven. A Matter of Life and Death, a guy is supposed to die, but he somehow survives. So there's this, does he deserve to keep living? And he's playing some games, some chess. Mm-hmm. So there's some chess references that Bergman would use later on. And there was paintings and stuff like that showed, and that's what helped inspire him to do the actual stage play, was this painting of death playing chess with a knight. So it's just so iconic. There's just so many different movies, TV shows, wherever you see like death, white-faced cloak, Seventh Seal.
Iconic.
It's iconic. You can't get much more iconic than this movie. It's just... And if you haven't seen it, if you're kind of weary, I understand people being weary of Ingmar Bergman. Again, he's portrayed as a depressing, all of his movies are dark, depressing. Yes, there is dark and depressing, but again, there's so many scenes where you find yourself chuckling, especially when the cynical squire is in a bar with this guy who's talking about his philandering wife. He's all upset because one of the acting troupe is literally having sex with that guy's wife, but he picks on the wrong actor. Oh. The weak actor who has these visions, who is like innocent, he's targeting him the whole movie, and it's the other actor, the one who's actually the director of the acting troupe, kind of sneaks off and tries to have his way with this guy's wife. But there's this whole sequence where they're joking about women in the bar. And you find yourself laughing. There's a lot of humor in this movie. You can't overlook how humorous this movie is. It's just a movie that's timeless. And that's the special thing about this movie. I mean, no matter how many times you see it, you pick up something new, and that's the gift of Ingmar Bergman and a film in general. A good film you can always watch as if you're watching it for the first time. That's what I love about this movie. Adam, I know you haven't seen it, but
I'll definitely check it out.
You gotta. Yeah. It's one of those essential films, and again, I'm probably overpraising it. Now he's going to hate it. But Seventh Seal, I mean, again, Criterion has a beautiful 4K restoration of this film. It's also in the Ingmar Bergman box set that they released 6 years back. BFI has released an even better 4K restoration from what a lot of the critics are saying. But either way, this is a movie that is essential. If you love movies, you need to see The Seventh Seal at least once. So I highly recommend it. Scared for Reals. See you next time.